Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. I'm joined by Sheldon Richman, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show, as you know, that brings you the libertarian perspective on what's going on in the world. Sheldon, a few weeks ago we were talking about the highway robbery that's being done by DEA agents, highway patrol, and other law enforcement officials, where they use the drug war to pull people aside on the highways, find some cash on them, and steal the cash, and go on and use it to fund their police departments and their new militarized weaponry and so forth, and tell the people, well, we're not going to charge you with any crime, and we don't really care whether you were involved in a crime or not. All that we care about is that you were carrying a large amount of cash, and we're taking it from you. If you don't like it, sue us. And, of course, all too many people, which they know full well in the police departments and so forth, can't go out and hire the lawyers, especially on the medium-sized amounts of money. And so the cops and the DEA and the rest of the law enforcement officials get to keep the money. Now, we just learned, thanks to the New York Times, that the IRS has been doing the exact same thing. They're going in there and seizing cash in people's bank accounts, just confiscating it. No lawsuit, no anything. Just telling the banker, give the money to us. And, of course, the bankers are nice and deferential. They do whatever the IRS tells them, and they give this money over to the IRS. And the reason is involved in this so-called structuring law that Congress enacted, or that the government's come up with rules and regulations on, that require people that make deposits to not structure it in such a way as to avoid these ridiculous $10,000 reporting requirements where the bank has to report large deposits so that the government can be aware of whether there's drug dealers that are depositing large amounts of cash. And turns out that a lot of these people have been depositing just smaller amounts of money, and the government says, well, that's structuring. You're trying to avoid reporting requirements. That means that you're doing something wrong, and they just steal their money, even though in I think it was 80% of the cases, they never charge the person with a crime. They're absolutely, totally innocent. The IRS acknowledges that and says, tough luck. If you don't like us, sue us. How in the world is this reconcilable in a free society, Sheldon?
Well, it isn't. The government keeps an eye on us in all kinds of ways. You can't take $10,000 or more out of the country without informing the government. And your bank will tell the government under the law that if you're depositing $10,000 or more on a single occasion, and if you owe more than once, deposit an amount that's not far from $10,000, under $10,000, it could raise a suspicion in the eyes of the IRS people watching that you're doing that intentionally to avoid the reporting requirement. They can then, therefore, they would regard as a crime, avoiding that regulation as a crime. And then on those grounds, like with asset forfeiture, they can seize it on the grounds of suspicion of a crime and yet not charge you. And by not charging you, of course, it means there's never a court proceeding in which the government has the burden of proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, where they have to show all the elements of the crime. Instead, the initiative now is on the person deprived of his or her own property. That person must go into court and have the burden of proof. Most find it too expensive. Legal services are expensive. There was a case of one guy who had been putting away less than $10,000 at a time and saving for his multiple daughters' college education. He ended up in a settlement. He got some money back, but he had to forego $21,000 to the IRS. For what? He hadn't committed a crime. They hadn't proved any crime. But I guess he was just, beaten down in the negotiations over settlement, and finally said, okay, let me at least get something and get out of here. It's costing me a ton of money in legal expenses. So this is modern America. Of course, banking was never free in the United States, but this is modern America.
Yeah, it really is. And what's really ironic about it is how everybody praises America for being a free country. How in the world is this a free country when this type of thing is going on? I mean, we're talking about innocent people here. People that go and make deposits for any number of just business decisions. One story involved a businessman who was just depositing small deposits during the entire day because his insurance policy covered only a $10,000 cash loss. So if somebody came in and robbed his store of $15,000, the insurance company would cover only $10,000. So during the course of the day, he would have employees going to the bank several times with smaller deposits, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, so that he wouldn't be at risk with respect to his insurance company. And the interesting thing about this thing is that the bank can't tell the customer, hey, you got to watch out here. There's this law that prohibits you from doing this. The IRS requires the banker to stay totally silent. Don't protect the interests of your customer, because we're sitting back there, rubbing our hands together saying, this looks juicy. And so they can't tell the customer what's going on. The customer innocently is making these deposits, and they confiscate their money. People that are just sitting there have a very valid reason for doing this. And you're right, the attorney's fees. You go to a lawyer in this. Let's say that the article said that the median seizure was about $34,000. And you go to a lawyer and you say, okay, I've lost $34,000. The lawyer's going to charge you either by the hour or a contingent fee based on a percentage. So the contingent fee is probably going to range around 40%, maybe as low as a third, but most likely about 40%. So the guy that's lost this $34,000 is already looking at a 40% loss. He might go to the IRS, and the IRS says, well, look, we'll settle with you. Right here, we'll just settle. We'll give you a third, or we'll give you half, and we keep half. You save all the lawyer fees and so forth. I mean, it's just extortion. That's really what it is sheer extortion. But regardless, the person's going to lose a large chunk of the money. And so, if you talk about criminal racketeering, seems to me that the best example of criminal racketeering is exactly what the IRS is doing. I mean, in any normal judicial process, before the government does bad things to people, there's been two prerequisites long established in the law: notice and hearing. That before you're going to take a person's life or his property or his liberty away from him, you've got to give him notice. And before you do this, and then you have a hearing where the person can come and show the judge, I got nothing here to hide, Judge. But all that time he's sitting with his cash. They've done away with all that. They've done away with notice requirements, hearing requirements. They've done away with all due process when it comes to the cops on the highways and now the IRS and bank seizures. That the IRS can go in there and just steal your money, and that's what it is, just stealing. And without any notice, without any hearing, then you have the burden of going out and hiring a lawyer. With what money? I don't know, because they just seized all the money you have in your bank account, unless you, like I say, go on a contingency fee and lose 40% of your money right off the bat to the lawyer. This is a horrific system, obviously, Sheldon, and there'll be those that are calling for reform of this. The IRS has already acknowledged that it's been doing bad things, and it says it's going to reform itself and it's going to do better in the future. They're only going to seize people where they suspect them of having committed a crime or what they call exceptional circumstances. Well, that's ridiculous. And so you've got people that I know that are devoted to reforming the IRS and making it work, but there's really only one solution to this thing. Ditch the whole war on drugs and ditch the IRS and the income tax. Really, there's nothing. If anybody that wants a free society, that's the only thing that can be done. Is strike at the root instead of trimming the branches.
Well, it's the war on terror and the war on guns. It's not just drugs. I mean, what gets this going, what makes it seem plausible when these ideas get started in Congress and then to a lot of people, is that this is a way for the IRS to sniff out money from what they call illicit activities. So you have to, end all those victimless crimes that then lead to so-called illicit activities and profits, which then get deposited. Another element of a rule of law, reasonable rule of law, is that people ought to know. You talk about notice, but there's even a prior notice. You need to know what you're not allowed, what's illegal in advance. It should be clean and reasonable and clear in advance, so you know what constitutes a legal violation. Some of the people who made repeated deposits under $10,000 didn't know they were committing a crime of any kind, or even that they would be raising a suspicion of having committed a crime. They thought, because they did hear from their bank, maybe unofficially, but they heard from maybe the teller, that this saved the bank trouble. They wouldn't have to report if it's under 10,000. So in order to do their banker a favor, they kept it under 10,000. They divided their deposits or spread them out. That was the only thing in their mind, not to get around the regulation. They just thought they were doing a favor. And yet, if the IRS agent, whoever monitors these things, sees a pattern, then they can go after this person thinking, aha, that person is systematically getting around our regulation. That's illegal. We're going to seize the money. But on the other hand, we don't even ever need to prove that a crime was committed or that a criminal mind, the mens rea, existed in the person. They don't have to do that under this sort of forfeiture law. So, yeah, it's a horrific system, and you need to root out the IRS. But to root out the IRS, you need to abolish taxes, because, I hear people advocate a sales tax, the fair tax, the VAT, flat tax. None of that's going to get rid of the IRS. You're still going to have a regular investigatory agency to make sure all is being collected that Congress wants collected. So I don't see how you get rid of the IRS without getting rid of taxation.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about this whole system is how it turns these bankers into snitches. I mean, they've really become agents of the IRS in this thing, where they are required to report to the government anything suspicious. So in one article I read, there was like 700,000 reports from bankers to the government about suspicious activity on the part of their customers. Well, that's exactly what goes on in communist countries. I remember when I visited Cuba many years ago, they were explaining to me that they had the neighborhood watch person on every block, and he's the official snitch. He reports on suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Well, that's now what they've done with these banks. The bankers are snitches for the government. They're agents of the government, and they're selling their customers down the river. And really, I'm not being condemnatory, because if they don't do that, the government will go after them as co-conspirators, imposing enormous fines. So the bankers are bending over backwards to do whatever the government does. But notice how this thing has evolved. This thing starts out as a war on drugs many years ago. They've had drug laws for a century now, but the big war on drugs starts up in the 70s. And it's classic Ludwig von Mises, where you have one intervention leading to another intervention to another intervention. Nothing ever works. I mean, everybody's getting the drugs they want, but you end up with this enormous police state, especially in the financial industry. I mean, this notion that you have to report when you're carrying $10,000 out of the country, or when you're bringing $10,000 in, or if it's in excess of $10,000, and then they expanded to the banks, and then we all know what they've done. They've broken the centuries-long secrecy of Swiss banks. And they make people believe that all this is necessary. This is what we need to do to catch the drug dealers. And, of course, now the terrorists. Ever since 9/11, that's the new bugaboo. But in the entire process, they just clamp down tighter and tighter and tighter on the liberty and privacy of the citizenry. As far as I'm concerned, banks should be free to keep every bit of their business private from the government. And people ought to be able to come into a bank and make whatever deposits, 1,000, 50,000, 2 million, 5 million, without the government finding out about it. It's none of the government's business what people are doing with their money. And instead, what the government does is it uses these ridiculous wars that it starts, like the war on drugs and the war on terrorism, and maybe even the war on poverty, these ridiculous wars as the excuse to assault people's liberty and privacy, things that are antithetical to a free society.
Yeah, I mean, we do associate this with communist regimes, but this stuff was not invented by the communists. It goes way back. Throughout American history, there's been a war between the customs agents and the smugglers ever since the country was founded, and probably to this day. The only thing that's really changed is the American people used to be on the smuggler side. Now they're on the customs agent side. That's a sad development, but that's really the only change. There's always been contraband, things we're not supposed to have, and therefore the government's out to find out if any of us have it. And the products may change, but heck, a guy got killed in, where was it, Brooklyn or one of the boroughs of New York, the policeman put a chokehold on him and killed him. And what were they accusing him of? Having untaxed cigarettes. Things haven't changed. It's nothing to do with communism. You know, Mao and Marx and Lenin did not invent this. This is what the government does to us until the people maybe rise up one day and say, we're not going to take this anymore. But that's what we're trying to stimulate here.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you raised because, you know, it really goes to what the root of the problem is here. I mean, you know, they can try to rein in the IRS, but nobody ever does that in Congress. In fact, I don't know if anyone in Congress is speaking out against this or proposing any legislation. I certainly have not heard it become a campaign issue. The White House is staying silent on it. And why not? I mean, the IRS is doing the dirty work for the politicians. They know they've got this massive welfare warfare state that is spending ever growing quantities of money. They know they have to raise the money to finance the welfare warfare state. So here you've got this agency that's doing the dirty work for them. Otherwise, they have to raise taxes or they have to continue borrowing the money, which, you know, is sending the mountain of debt that the federal government's in to ever increasing levels. That's what, you know, raising the debt ceiling's all about. And so here the IRS says, hey, don't worry, boys. You don't need to raise taxes. You don't need to worry about it. We'll just go out and take people's money directly. You know, I mean, why tax that businessman when you can just go out and seize his money from his bank account? And from what I read, the IRS gets a cut of this. The large amount of the money goes into the general coffers for the government to fund its welfare warfare state apparatus, but the IRS gets a cut. And I guess that they use that. I don't know what they use it for, maybe remodeling of offices or more audits or hire more auditors or employees and so forth. But it's just a crooked system. It's an absolutely crooked system. But the root of it is, okay, the drug war. That's one root. I mean, that's the excuse they use, the primary excuse for all these assaults on privacy. The war on terrorism, that's directly linked to the interventionist foreign policy, where you've got these invasions and occupations and assassinations. But really, Sheldon, the big root of this huge thing, you got these small roots, but the big giant root is this concept that America needs a welfare state apparatus and a warfare state apparatus. This giant military industrial complex, NSA, CIA. Over here, you've got massive welfare redistribution, taking from one group of people and giving it to another group of people. They need money for that. And that's what this is all about. That's why you got the silence among politicians that are running for office about this thing, silence in Congress, and silence in the White House, because they're sitting there saying, it's okay. They're getting the money that we need for our beloved little socialist interventionist system here.
You're right. It finances their playground. Why would they want to cut off the source of money to their fun and games, which is spending money? Where are they if they have no money to spend? All that we're talking about here is the fruit of the poisonous tree. And the poisonous tree, of course, is the principle of taxation, that the government can just seize your money, can pass a law saying we can seize your money based on any formula they want. And I'm reminded of what the Anti-Federalists warned, back in between 1787 and 1789, that the taxing power was going to turn into a monster. And they were absolutely right. They warned that it was all-encompassing, and the Supreme Court has later ruled that it's comprehensive, it's plenary, it's all-encompassing. There's one case where they used about 6 or 7 synonyms for the idea of all-encompassing. There are basically no limits. There are a couple of minor limits within the Constitution. Otherwise, no limits. And the Court has even said that if A loans money to B, and B pays, let's say it's zero interest, and B pays the money back, just pays the principal back, that Congress could tax that if it wanted to. But it's in its good graces and its generosity, according to the Supreme Court. In its generosity, it does not count that as income. Thanks a lot. But they can count anything they want as income. There are just no limits.
Yeah, well, let's paint the libertarian picture of a free society the way we envision it. Now, we can disagree, and you and I have disagreed on the core feature of government. Do you need government to do the things like punish the murderers and the rapists and thieves? I mean, we'd all agree those people need to be punished. We might differ on whether there should be a government or not. But where we agree all of us in the libertarian movement, is that there, at the very minimum, there should be no welfare state apparatus. There's absolutely no reason why government has to be in the business of taking one person's money and giving it to another person. It's just nothing but mandated charity, and it's a crooked, corrupt system. It makes people dependent on the system. And then this whole giant warfare state apparatus, giant military empire, bases in overseas countries, invasions, occupations, big standing army, CIA, regime change operations, the whole NSA surveillance schemes. We libertarians would say at a very minimum, you're not living in a free society when you live under a government that can assassinate you and torture you and incarcerate you with under military rule without any kind of judicial process. So lo and behold, Americans live without a welfare state and a warfare state for more than 100 years. And then funding this monstrosity is this IRS and this income tax, which Americans live without also for more than 100 years. So you've read this fantastic book on abolishing the income tax for FFF. You've given the whole history of it, the tyrannical nature of it. And I totally agree with you, and not surprisingly, that you cannot have a society, a free society, where the government's got the authority to take whatever it wants. I mean, there is a difference between imposing an income tax and what the IRS is doing now. At least they're going through legislation to do that, where they're letting people know in advance, these are the rules. We're going to take 30% of your income or 40% of your income. At least people can plan for that. You and I would totally oppose that. We say that a free society necessarily requires that everybody keep whatever he earns. So when they enact this system of the IRS, they're really saying the exact opposite. We can take whatever we want by setting the percentage, and it's like an allowance. We'll let you keep a certain amount of your money as an allowance. But what they're doing now, Sheldon, where they're just directly taking people's money independent of the taxing system, it's absolutely the ultimate in tyranny, that we don't have to give you notice. We don't have to go through Congress. We just walk into your bank and seize your money. So from a libertarian standpoint, we'd get rid of the IRS. We'd get rid of the income tax. We'd get rid of the welfare state apparatus. We'd get rid of the warfare state apparatus. We'd get rid of the drug war. Now we're talking about a free society, and then we can talk about what to do with the rest of the government that's left over.
It's true that the IRS has a lot of scope, but who gave it the scope? Of course, it was Congress and whoever was in power in the White House at the time who signed, the relevant laws. They could repeal that. They could put the IRS much more in a cage. Again, I don't favor these mere reforms, but it would be still some improvement in our day-to-day lives. But they could restrict the IRS by voting the appropriate law, and then the President of the United States would have to sign it. But of course, they won't do that for reasons you mentioned earlier. They want the money. Why would you go? You don't go after the cow. If you want milk, you don't shoot the cow, or you don't even put the cow, make the cow uncomfortable and limit its movement. It needs the grass and do all that stuff to make the milk. So why would they do that? And it would be nice if people started demanding this. I would love to see scenes on the news of people going to the district meetings of members of the House or meetings with the senators in public and speaking to them. I won't say shout and scream, but in very firm, loud tones. Why are you letting us be tyrannized by the IRS when you have it within your power to stop it, and you will not? Explain it to me and all of my people, all the people here, and everybody watching on TV. I want that explained right now. Wouldn't you love to see that happen in state after state and district after district? It would do my heart good, I think.
Oh, I would absolutely love it. I mean, and that's really what we do here at FFF, is raise people's vision to a higher level here as to what it really means to be free. Because otherwise people are willing to settle for the IRS representations of, oh, we'll do a better job. We'll do it only on people we really think are committing a crime. I mean, that's an acknowledgement that they've been going after innocent people. They've admitted that they were going after innocent people just to grab the cash. And really what we do is we cause people to break out of the box and say, you don't have to live like this as Americans. That this is not what America stands for. America stands for something bigger and more noble and grander than to put up with this kind of IRS income tax Federal Reserve system. And most important, you don't need to live like this, that you can live a free life without these apparatuses involved here. And I think that, of course, we've talked about the educational system, but that's another route here where people get inculcated with this notion that, oh, well, we couldn't live without a massive warfare state. The world would be insecure and America would be insecure. It's precisely because we've got this warfare state apparatus, this national security establishment, that America is insecure. That's the cause of the problem. And then you've got the welfare state where we cause people to break out to a higher level. You don't need to be forced to be good and caring and responsible. That's not what freedom's about. And so now when we start talking about breaking free of this thing, and hopefully, more and more Americans start figuring it out, that they're not living lives of free men and women, and they want to live a life of a free man and woman before they pass from this life. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about some mass movements here that say, we're not putting up with this anymore. This is not what America is all about. It was not what America's founding principles were all about, and it's unnecessary, and it's antithetical to freedom. It's actually a deprivation of freedom.
Yeah, when I think of our role in all this, I often remember the great movie Network, where the Peter Finch Anchorman character, played by Peter Finch, stands up and tells people to go to your window and shout, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." And of course, people all over the city do it. I guess it's supposed to be New York, maybe it is New York. So that's a symbol of what we want people to do. But that's the feeling. We want people to realize they don't have to take it, and they won't take it. And then they can figure out what needs to be done. But the first thing I want to get people to do is think about these things, and then find a way to act on it, because otherwise we're just sheep who are there just being fleeced, year in and year out, and never put up a fuss.
Oh, we're like
won't change that way.
Yeah, we're like little serfs, little passive serfs that the government buys us off with. The welfare plans, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, welfare, SBA loans, FDIC protection. It's all this little stuff that softens up a citizenry, that where people become so dependent on the system that they can't say, I've had enough, I can't take it anymore, because they're so scared that they're going to have the dole terminated. The government's not going to be there to take care of them. It's like a little child with a parent. He sees his parent doing something bad, but he doesn't want to report his parents to the cops, or, if his parents are engaged in some robbery scheme or something, because he'd be left out all alone. Well, we're talking about 40 and 50-year-old people that feel that way about the government. Oh, no, I can't. Government might not provide my children with their education. I can't stand there and say I won't take it anymore. I mean, look at the elections tomorrow, Sheldon. I know we're about out of time, but you got these elections all across the land. People have poured in millions of dollars into campaign contributions. For what? I mean, you've got the same system, and all they're doing is fighting over who's going to rule the system, who's going to be the bosses of the IRS. But nobody's talking about fundamental change. That is, change that involves a free society, abolishing the IRS. I don't see any candidate with the exception of some libertarians, but the Democrats and Republicans are all mired in this same system. And to me, that is not the solution here, to be pouring money into political candidates that aren't going to change a thing. It's just a power game. The real answer lies in the American people themselves, that if they finally realize we are not a free people anymore and we want to be free, then I think you're going to see some massive change in this country. Any final words from you?
Well, Election day is always mixed emotions for me, because the good news is that the losers lose, but the bad news is the winners win. So I'll be depressed tomorrow.
On that note, we'll wrap things up. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. I'm Jacob Hornberger, and with Sheldon Richmond, the FF's Vice President. And it's nice to be with you all. We'll see you next week.